I'm going to share a little scripture from Matthew 25. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne, and all nations will be gathered before him. And he will separate the people from one another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come to me. You who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you stranger and invited you, or needing clothes and clothed you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you?"
But I'm not rolling on
The
it.
king will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for
I
one
just
of
want a
the
little
least
bit of
of my
video.
brothers
Take
and
back the truck.
sisters of mine, you did for me." God of many names, of many shades, many beliefs, we ask you to be among us, to be the peaceful maker of our conversations. We ask you to lead us, to help others, to help our community to grow, to separate those things that keep us apart from each other. We ask you to bless us today and every day in our lives. We ask this to you, who lives and reigns forever and ever. Amen.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Alderman Raymond Lopez of Chicago's 15th Ward. I'd like to welcome you all for joining us this evening. Before we begin, I need to go over a couple of items. We are going to have a presentation on the Gage Park Fieldhouse transformation, and then we will take questions from the public. If you are here and wish to share your thoughts without speaking, please fill out this card and provide it to anybody either at the check-in or any of the staff here. If you wish to speak, you'll be given 1 minute to pose your question to this panel. Please keep your questions concise so that we can try to accommodate everyone's questions this evening. You must fill out this form. Please fill it out thoroughly and completely. No half-filled forms will be accepted. We will call individuals up 5 at a time, and please forgive me if we mispronounce. I'll do my best to pronounce your name. I'd like to also thank our panel that is here this evening with us. From the Office of Emergency Management Communication, I have Matt Dowdy. From the Department of Family and Support Services, I have Danny Castaneda. From the Mayor's Office, we have Jesus Del Toro. From the Chicago Park District, we have Maya Solis. And from CPD, we have 8th District Commander Brian Sprini and Deputy Chief, yep, there he goes, Stephen Chung. So if I may, a round of applause thanking them for participating. We are in a humanitarian crisis, a crisis that has been brought to the city of Chicago by individuals from across this country. This crisis is fueled by a failure of the federal government 36 years in the making. 36 years ago, Then President Ronald Reagan granted amnesty to all undocumented individuals living in the United States of America. At any point, Congress, House or Senate, or any president since could have pushed to fix and make stable this city's immigration, asylum, and naturalization process. It has not. And whatever your concerns are with regards to the federal policy, I understand frustration, but allow me to say this is not the venue. No one on this stage or in this room has the authority to address federal policy. What we are addressing is the human crisis that we've seen unfold in our city since August of last year, when the very first busload of individuals arrived in our city. We have two options. We can play the politics like others, ping-ponging these families, these men, women, children, babies across the city of Chicago, shelter to shelter, district to district, or we can say enough. We can end the juggling and start processing and helping them move forward so that we can move forward as a city. Because what we've seen up to this point as of late are hundreds. I think at one point the high water mark was 800 individuals in the lobbies, parking lots, restrooms, and public areas of our police district stations across the city of Chicago. We cannot continue down that. More specifically, as we opened in faith, I'm confident in saying many of you are people of faith yourselves. It is against our faith to turn a blind eye to the suffering of those here, and we must stand up, we must lead, and we must show the rest of the city how to do so. We are here today because on May 18th, I approached our new mayor, Brandon Johnson, members of his administration and the Chicago Park District, and offered what I believed was a policy solution to both the short and long-term needs that we're seeing unfold before us. The use of the Gage Park Fieldhouse as a processing and respite center for those coming to the city of Chicago. We have seen in other areas of the city where temporary use of facilities have been propped up, but they are not lasting. They are always short-term. They are the short-term to the short-term. That cannot continue. We will discuss what I had proposed to the mayor and his team and everyone on this stage, was that we would turn the field house proper, the building of the Gage Park, into a center where it would be safe to bring the migrants, it would be safe for the community, where we could offer health screenings and help provide the health care that they need in a secure and dignified manner, and that it would be temporary, so that working with our partners, we could find them and transition them into more stable housing that didn't require them to be shuttled district to district, shelter to shelter. At the time, that would have cleared the police districts of every body, man, woman, and child that was in there. In the week since that announcement, several more busloads have arrived at our doorstep. Even our solution isn't enough, because this can't just be our solution. This has to be a Chicago solution until the federal government does its job to correct this issue. Today, you're going to hear what we are going to do in Gage Park. Today, you're going to hear what we are doing for those that use Gage Park, inside or out of the field house. You're going to hear of the impact that it will have on our police districts and our ability to help through our delegate partners. And you're going to hear what we're going to offer those who need the help the most, the asylum seekers who have been shipped to Chicago, I thank you all for being here. We are happy to discuss your concerns at the end of this presentation. And again, anyone wishing to speak, this is how you do it. And know that I understand people's tensions. I understand that emotions are high on all sides. But we can have and will have a very dignified conversation today. And I ask and encourage all of you to join me in maintaining the civility of this room, the sanctity of its space, and the recognition of our neighbors as we carry on this discussion. So with that, I will turn this over to Matt so that we can begin the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman, and thank you for your support. All right, once again, my name is Matt Dowdy from the Chicago Office of Emergency Management and Communications. All of us up here on the panel, as well as hundreds of others, have been deeply involved in this mission going back to last August when we first discovered that the state of Texas would soon start sending buses to Chicago. So it's been a pretty long journey, a challenging journey. We're certainly not at the finish line just yet, which is why we're here today to talk about this important topic. We've prepared a short presentation, and we're happy to entertain your questions. All right, let's get a quick background of how we arrived here today. Thus far, we've estimated that we've received over 11,000 individuals and asylum seekers that have arrived here in Chicago, going back to when our first bus arrived on August 31st, 2022. They've come from dozens of nations, but as we probably all know, there's a large concentration of Central and South American arrivals have come here, and a large percentage of those have come from Venezuela, but there are certainly other countries represented as well. As I mentioned, those first arrivals came with little notice from the state of Texas. We learned about them in mid-August, and we had roughly 2 weeks to properly prepare for the first round, and we've been really preparing ever since to try to keep up with the flow. Since that time, though, we've noticed that asylum seekers have also arrived here via other means. They've been financed to take bus trips or plane trips, or they've found their way here via Amtrak or Greyhound, however they've been able to get here. So it's not just the state of Texas that has been sending buses from the border, but other people have been able to find their way here as well. All right, important to note, because we get this question often, ultimately a topic comes back to Chicago homeless. It's important to note that none of the funding for this mission is diverted from funding that has been allocated for Chicago homeless. That continues to be a high important priority for us. We want to make sure that we are not diverting any funding. Going back to last year, we're on a constant search for shelter spaces across the city that we need to provide those basic needs for our guests. It's really an all hands on deck approach. Our office, OEMC, DFSS, the mayor's office, and several other city agencies, as well as non-governmental organizations, have all been participating and responding to this crisis. Important to note, we learned yesterday, just a little over 24 hours ago, that the state of Texas was sending 4 buses to the city of Chicago today. To be honest, I can't remember the last time they sent 4 on one day. I know it was in 2022. It's been a while. That surprised us a little bit, and we spent some time scrambling to find the appropriate sheltering facilities for the folks. I'm happy to say that all 4 buses safely arrived today, and we were able to get all of the arrivals who were interested in coming with us to shelter. We were able to get a roof over their heads tonight, but it just shows the challenge that we are under to try to find appropriate facility space for our new arrivals. All right, going back to last August, we've had a total of 24 shelters and 2 airport staging areas in response to this mission. Not all 24 are open right now. We've had to open and close shelters as needed. As the alderman mentioned, these are temporary facilities. Sometimes they need to get back to their original intended use. So it's a constant search for new facilities that continues to this day. Ideally, we would love to find spaces with at least 250 people. At the end of the day, large congregate facilities work better for us than smaller facilities. They allow us to maximize our staffing ratio, and it just makes it for a more efficient process. So obviously we want to make sure that these are livable spaces for our guests, with space for eating and showers, and obviously we want to make sure that it's up to code and passes all safety tests. We've had a lot of offers for potential facility space over the last 10 months. We've learned that just because there's available space doesn't necessarily mean it's adequate for shelter. A lot of places that we've been offered are a little dilapidated. They were going to require months of rehab work in order to get them suitable for habitation, not to mention costing hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars to get them to that spot. So one of the reasons why Gage Park is such an attractive facility for us. We here on the representing the city, we are limited to looking to facilities within city limits. We do continue to work with our state and county partners on perhaps exploring other facilities outside of Chicago, or perhaps having other municipalities who are interested in taking on some of our new arrivals to help us. But for the most part, we are restricted to working here within the city limits. As was kind of previously mentioned, we have limitations with federal government assistance here, largely because they have not declared a presidential declaration. They have not declared a presidential disaster associated with this mission, unlike what you would see after a large hurricane or a tornado or flooding. If that were the case, we would have a lot more federal dollars coming our way. We have gotten some limited funding through various federal grant sources, but we are unfortunately limited into what we're receiving by the federal government. Also, in a normal post-disaster environment, we would likely see a lot of assistance from the American Red Cross. Unfortunately, because there is no declaration associated with this does not meet their threshold for their disaster response. They have been able to help in other ways with technical assistance, but we are not seeing the level of response that they would normally provide in a post-disaster environment. As we all know, the overflow is stressing our police stations. That's been going on for like the last 2 months. The alderman referenced at one point we were over 800 people in our police stations across the city. Thankfully, we've been able to trim that back a little. As of this morning, we were just over 150 persons in our police districts, but I think we all know that is still too many, and it needs to be a high priority to decompress those police districts as quickly as possible so they can get back to the work that they were intended to do. We've all seen families having to sleep on the floors. We're doing whatever we can on the city's level to find new sheltering for them as quickly as possible. So therefore, Gage Park is the solution that we're looking for soon. It's a city facility. It does not cost us anything extra in rental fees that we may have seen from other facilities that we've explored over the last 10 months, and it's available essentially now. Okay, here's a quick look at our 11 active shelters. And going back to last August, we have a geographically diverse set of shelters across the city, as far north as Rogers Park and as far south as Roseland. So really pretty much all over the place. Right now we've got our High Ridge YMCA in the West Ridge neighborhood, the Inn of Chicago on the near north side, Wadsworth Elementary in Woodlawn, the Young Women's Leadership Academy in Douglas, Social Club Hotel in the Loop, North Park Village in North Park, Leone Beach Park in Rogers Park, Brands Park in Avondale, Piotrowski Park in South Lawndale, and most recently Wright College in Dunning and Daly College in West Lawn. Those were two that we opened very recently. And here's just a quick map to show you how geographically diverse our shelter locations are. And as I mentioned, this has changed from time to time over the last 10 months, but for the most part, our shelters continue to be spread out across the city. Okay, as I mentioned, we've done a lot of research over the last 10 months to try to find appropriate facility space. We've looked at over 200 locations, including vacant schools, hotels, faith-based institutions. But as I mentioned, a lot of them just don't meet that minimum threshold for us to move in and take over as a shelter at any point in the near future. So again, that's why Gage Park is such an attractive option right now. And I'd like to turn it over to Danny from DFSS to talk about some shelter basics.
Good evening, good evening, everyone. My name is Danny Castañeda. I work for the Department of Family and Support Services. I'm the Homeless Services Division, tasked with the oversight of our Chicago homeless shelter system, but also for the new arrivals response. So what residents or clients of the Gage Park shelter can expect is similar to what any shelter client can expect across the new arrival system. So really the basics include, a safe place to rest, so a cot, blanket, and a pillow, and then a safe place to shower and access to hygiene products, laundry services for any personal belongings, and then food, which includes 3 meals a day. Additionally, we provide transportation to healthcare screening, so it is expected and offered to every new arrival that is being intaked at a new arrival shelter, access to healthcare screening, and then follow-up appointments should they need specialty care or follow-up appointments for the entirety of their stay at our shelter. And then the majority of our staff, given that primarily most of our new arrivals are Spanish-speaking and Spanish-speaking only, we do have the majority of our shelter staff bilingual in English and Spanish. So it is an offer to them. Folks, for example, today who arrived on the 4 buses to Chicago from Texas today, many of them had other plans, so did not necessarily need or require shelter. But those that do are offered shelter with us in the new arrival system. But they are allowed to come and go as they please. Obviously, and we'll get into this in future slides, there are policies in place for shelter residents, which our shelter staff are there to enforce. But otherwise, residents can come and go, and they just are required to abide by the curfew that's in place, which is 11 p.m., but we'll get into that in the next couple of slides. So right now, just given the fluidity of the situation, but for now we are establishing, or we are asking for Gage Park to function as a shelter for adults, which could include adult families, meaning a father with an adult child, for example, but Gage Park would not have families with children. And primarily the population that would be at Gage Park are those that are waiting for shelter at police stations right now. And then one of the main questions that we've gotten is how do people get connected to healthcare? Many have had very long journeys and have been waiting at police stations for some time. So our priority is to make sure that we are offering them healthcare support, and that's done through a number of ways. First and foremost, Cook County Health has been a huge partner with us. So our intent and offer to every shelter resident is to visit Cook County Health, and the goal is typically within 72 hours of being intaked at a shelter, and they get a full health screening, vaccinations are offered, et cetera, COVID testing, all of the above. And then in addition to that, the Chicago Department of Public Health has 2 partners that work with us across our Chicago homeless shelter system, but have also expanded to the new arrival shelter system, which is this shelter-based care. So it's Lawndale Christian Health Centers and Heartland Alliance, which are our 2 shelter-based healthcare providers that, again, are on a rotating schedule to provide on-site care, which includes connection to mental health care. And then we also, the Chicago Department of Public Health has done a really great job of linking our shelters with local federally qualified health centers, or FQHCs for short, which are also on site on a rotating schedule to really provide that care coordination should someone need medical care outside of Cook County Health as our primary healthcare provider, and then our on-site healthcare providers, which are Lawndale Christian Health Center and Heartland Alliance. So in addition to that, then we are able to tap into the network of mobile health and crisis and urgent care teams that the city funds and partners with on a yearly, on a yearly basis that we are able to tap into for new arrival shelters. So in short, there are a number of options and different ways that we can connect shelter residents to healthcare. And so what rules and expectations are there for residents? So these rules include no visitors, meaning that if you are a shelter resident, you're not allowed to have a guest within the shelter. So the only authorized personnel and shelter residents are allowed within the facility. And then in addition to partners that are approved to be on site to provide support services. No walk-ins, meaning that if someone is seeking shelter, they're not necessarily just able to walk up to the shelter and be placed there, given that we have a number of people waiting at police stations and oftentimes in other locations. We want to make sure that we're serving people who have been waiting the longest first. So rather than folks being able to just show up to the front door of the shelter, we ask them to sort of follow the process that everyone else is being asked to follow. So again, so that we are serving those who have been here the longest and who have been waiting the longest. And then as previewed earlier, we do have an 11 p.m. curfew. So we make that very clear upon intake. So all of the shelter rules that residents are asked to abide by, those rules are reviewed with them upon the intake. So, within the first 20 minutes or 30 minutes of being at the shelter, and they also sign and date these rules. So obviously, if it ever comes to a point of needing to hold them accountable to those rules, we can always refer back to the rules that they signed. And then we do have a sign in and out protocol with the front desk staff so that we always know who is on site and to ensure that only those who are authorized to be on site have access to the facility. We do have no drugs and alcohol allowed on site at all. So we do enforce that regularly if and when needed. And then clients are obviously asked to respect the entire property and treat it carefully. We do make it very clear that in many of the facilities that we are occupying and activating as shelters, we, the city, are also guests. So then we relay that to them so that they understand that it's not just we want you to respect the space, but understand that the city is also a guest in this space because we're activating facilities that are not necessarily intended to be used as shelters, but have the amenities needed to properly function as a shelter. So we just ask them to respect that space. No smoking is allowed inside, and then we do have a shower schedule just to maintain order within the facility. And then ultimately, if residents do violate any of the shelter rules, we do make it very clear to them that they may be discharged from the shelter if they don't comply. And so unless the reason for discharge is violence or active threat towards others, then the resident may be placed at another shelter location. Meaning, if I'm a shelter client of Gage Park, I violate a shelter rule and it's deemed necessary to discharge, it does not necessarily mean that they're still not able to seek shelter at another shelter, whether it's within the new arrival shelter system or the Chicago homeless shelter system.
Thanks, Danny. And I'll also add, these are the same policies that apply to every single shelter across our system. Okay, so let's get back to talking about Gage Park and when we'd like to move in. We've identified June 23rd, 3 days from now, as our earliest possible move-in date. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen that day. As we've said several times, it's still a very fluid process. Obviously, you got to make sure all the pieces are in place, including staffing, supplies, to properly open a shelter, but that is the earliest possible date that we could move in. As Danny mentioned earlier, we plan on hosting single adults at this shelter rather than families, and we estimate that our capacity at Gage Park could be upwards of 250 people. Okay. As it stands now, because it is such a fluid situation, we just mentioned the 4 buses that came in today, somewhat unexpectedly. We cannot establish a firm exit date for Gage Park right now. Every day we work with the Park District to talk about this option as well as other options across the city. As I mentioned, we're constantly on the search for large-scale congregate facilities. We certainly don't want to keep it open as a shelter any longer than is necessary, but obviously we want to make sure that all of our residents are properly cared for, and it's really difficult for us to provide a firm exit date right now, but we want it to be sooner rather than later. That's what we're saying at this moment. When that day arrives that we do decide to close it down, just like every other facility that we've been in, we're going to properly demobilize it and leave it as we found it, including a deep cleaning provided by the city immediately afterwards. And I'd like to turn it over to CPD to talk a little bit about community safety.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Commander Brian Spraney of the 8th District, which is on the other side of 55th Street here, for your support and everything that you guys have done so far in this problem that we've experienced the past year. I'd also like to throw a big thank you out to the officers of the Chicago Police Department who across the city have been handling this as well. Just some security basics. Security at most of the facilities, and Gage Park specifically, has Park District security. They have an outside security firm as well, so that's 2 layers. And we as CPD will also augment that. So we will assist in any areas with that. We'll do special attentions and special checks periodically within the site. There's a logbook for signing in and out in any activities. So together with all the security and the police department, which is a 24/7 operation, that's our segment of the security. There's non-emergency contact information available. It's on here. I'll read it out. It's the Office of New Americans at cityofchicago.org for any questions or information and non-emergency things that you may have.
All right, I'd like to turn it over to Jesus to talk a little bit about resettlement.
Good afternoon. Buenas tardes. Thank you to Alderman Raymond Lopez for bringing us together this afternoon. I also want to acknowledge Alderperson Helu Gutierrez for her presence today. I wanted to chat a bit about resettlement. It's not the goal for folks to be in shelter indefinitely. I think this is the next step that the city is really focusing on in conjunction with the state on how to do long-term transitions. I think it's important to realize that this is the first time that Chicago takes on resettlement to this volume. Many of you that know that migration is not new to the city. We have a long history of immigrants here. I think what's different and unique is the way in which they're arriving and the volume. Like we mentioned today, 4 buses arrived today. Tomorrow could be 1. Next week could be 10. And that's what's make this mission really difficult for those receiving cities like New York, DC, Chicago, Denver. So we're not the only cities experiencing this. So I did want to share that with folks. I also wanted to thank the many Chicagoans, whether mutual aid groups, NGOs who've stepped up, who've fed folks at police stations, who've donated, whether it's time or money. I think it's shown the values of the city. And I think, unlike New York, we had a couple of weeks to really think through a plan. And what we were asked is, what do you do when folks are just dropped off at Union Station with very little information, very little communication? And the goal is really to straighten our infrastructure. And I think that is clear from the lack of communication from the governor of Texas. And it's also to pin us against each other and sow division. And so we're going to try our best to ensure that folks have plans for the next step. But like I mentioned, this is a first for Chicago. So, and we've extended that same information to new arrivals as they're coming here with no idea of what Chicago is. Many of them still thought they were in Texas. So there's a lot of confusion, but what we've done is provided some clarity and hopefully some hope. So just wanted to touch on that first.
I didn't have a slide. My name is Maya Solis. Good evening. I want to talk about the patrons that are currently at Gage Park right now, or we're planning to be there for the summer. I know there's a couple parents here. And between me and the staff at Gage, we called everybody that was registered for day camp that starts June 26th and gave them an alternate location to have day camp. We are guaranteeing that if you registered, and I have your list of names for day camp at Gage Park, which runs for 6 weeks, which is June 26th to August 4th, you will have another spot. And the same can be said about our special rec and our hard of hearing programs. They will be moved to other locations as well. I'm sure we have other questions, but that's all I have for the Park District.
Thank you, Maya. And I'll also add, in regards to resettlement, we're not at the point yet where our resettlement numbers exceed our incoming numbers, but we are improving week to week. We're seeing more and more clients finding long-term housing. So there are some success stories out there. We still have a ways to go, but we are getting there. All right, Danny, would you like to talk about community involvement?
So in many conversations that we've been in, folks really want to understand how they can get involved and potentially any employment or workforce opportunities. So we just wanted to make sure that we included this information. So right now, all of our shelters are being staffed through a crisis response staffing agency known as Favorite Staffing. So if you know someone who may be interested in an employment opportunity, we are fairly consistently hiring through Favorite Staffing, so the website is listed there. And then we also, not at every facility, but at several of our facilities, we also have the city's security contractor, which is SkyTech Security. So again, another opportunity for employment through SkyTech. And then just generally just wanted to plug this in here for workforce development programs and other resources readily available from DFSS year-round outside of the new arrivals response. Just wanted to plug that website here as well. And then one of the biggest questions that we get is how, where, and what can I donate to support? We've gotten a lot of support around donations, so just want to say thank you to really everyone that has contributed in many ways, specifically around donations. But the website is listed there so that you can really get a sense of the items that we're really in need of. And specifically just want to note that we are trying to stick as much as possible to new items so that they're items that you and I, especially as it relates to clothing, that you and I would still wear, and not necessarily giving a new arrival clothes that you and I no longer want to wear. And then if you know of someone that is in need of shelter, please direct them to, or assist them in calling 311 to open a shelter request. We're trying to get through that as quickly as possible, but if someone is not in the queue and is not calling 311, then we can't help find them shelter. So just wanted to reiterate that as well.
Okay, and we also have this QR code where we can welcome more of your questions and comments. So we will leave this up on the screen for a time. I believe that is our last slide. Yes, it is. So with that, I think we are ready to entertain any questions tonight.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. First and foremost, let's thank our panel here for the great description of what's going on. If I may call to the center aisle, please, Maria Garcia, Father Homero Sanchez, Joseph Adamczyk, Marshall Jackson, and Luz Maria Cortez, please. While they are moving forward, just a reminder to everyone that is here, if you wish to leave an opinion without speaking publicly, please fill out one of these cards. They are available at both entrances. If you wish to speak, all speakers were asked to fill this out completely, thoroughly. We have 24 speakers, by the way. So we're going to keep this at 1 minute. I believe there are clocks in front of you, as concise and to the point, but if you try to go to 1 minute and one, that microphone is turning off. And that will be not by me. So with that, when you walk up, please state your name and begin.
Thank you. My name is Father Murrow Sanchez, the pastor of San Rita and St. Clair. First of all, thank you for really recognizing that we're in a crisis, and the crisis comes for everyone. My heart really shrinks for the police officers to start with, because it is the work is already hard. Coming back to the police station, where it's full of people that you don't know who they are, is more difficult. My question is more about work. These new arrivals are coming to the city. I don't think they're coming to take anybody's job. That's understandable. Everyone knows, and many in this room may be migrants as well. But how can they have a work if the work permit comes until after 150 days? That's the first thing. 311 is not working. That's a reality. So what can we do?
Thank you.
So to your question about 311, I think the challenge is that we are seeing way more shelter requests than we have shelter capacity. So when we say that 311 isn't working, it's not because 311, the system, is failing, but it's because we have been unable to keep up with creating shelter capacity at the extent that we are seeing people needing shelter. So that is true, and even then, we are in constant communication with the 311 team to see how we can change the process to make sure that the process isn't what's failing us. And what we're seeing day in and day out is that even with opening a new shelter, we just haven't gotten to a point where someone submits a 311 request and right away we have an available bed. So instead what happens is that there's a large backlog. But that doesn't mean, I don't want that to discourage anyone from calling 311 to open a shelter request, because that's still a really good data point for us. If we know right now that there are 300 open shelter requests via 311, but really there's another 700 that just don't want to call 311 to request shelter, then we're not ever able to plan around the full need. So please encourage people to call 311 if they are in need in shelter, so that we can continue to push and plan for the full need and not only for those that are willing and able to call 311.
Thank you, Father, for the question on the work permits. Yes, we've advocated to the federal government to expedite those work permits. Many of the folks that we talked to, they've made it clear, like, that we're thankful for the refuge, we're thankful for the food, but if the city of Chicago can provide us a work permit, we can become self-autonomous, we can take care of our own. But then we have to explain that, that is outside of the jurisdiction of a city.